Welcome. We're here at Sony Picture Studios in Culver City in the DMPC, which is their digital motion picture production studio. And I'm Steve Tobenkin. I'm the marketing and adoption lead for ACES from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. If you are expecting a conversation about baseball pitchers or poker players, you're sorely mistaken. The ACES that we're talking about today is the Academy Color Encoding System, which is a system to manage color, to manage digital file interchange and archiving for motion pictures and television. It in fact works for all kinds of productions, but we're going to focus today on motion pictures because we have some guests from Screen Gems who are using this and to great effect, and we're going to hear their story as well as a little bit of an introduction on ACES so everybody comes up to speed. We have an audience, so we may get some questions, and we'll do our best to accommodate that. But for the moment, I'm going to start by introducing our guests, and we're very happy to have Glenn Gainor, who is the president of physical production at Screen Gems, and he's a producer and oversees all of the film production at Screen Gems, and is sometimes the executive producer on UPM on their shows. So welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. Shelly Westerman, who is an independent editor who works on Screen Gems and other films, and she edited The Wedding Ringer and About Last Night, and we'll talk about those two films today. Welcome. And Alex Forsythe, who is the technical lead on the ACES project at the Motion Picture Academy. He's a color scientist and engineer by trade, and I think has pretty much been on the ground floor. You were in the beginnings of the ACES, yeah, which is great. So he's got a lot of background to be able to give us. So he's going to start off with a presentation to get everybody up to speed on ACES. It sounds complicated perhaps, but it isn't really when it's broken down, and we hope to do that. And then we'll start a discussion about how you guys use it in the real world and what the benefits are to producers and cinematographers and editors and all kinds of people. So Alex, if you could start off and give us a little primer on ACES, we'll get going.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, ACES is a free, open, device-independent color management system which was designed under the auspices of the Academy, and it really took form over about a 10-year period. Very early on in the production, the development of ACES, we realized that we'd lost the standards, the underlying standards for motion picture production as we were transitioning from film to digital. So the Academy got together the top color scientists, the top cinematographers, post-production people, visual effects artists, and started to try to understand how everybody worked in order to create a unified color management and interchange system that would serve the industry moving forward. ACES 1.0 really represents our first production-ready release of the system, and it is sort of a culmination of this 10-year investigation. The problem that we were trying to solve really was that motion pictures and television shows are complex collaborative efforts. And with film, it was easy. We could send film from one facility to another facility and very easily understand what that film meant, understand how we could view it. But once we moved into a digital arena, it became much more difficult. How to open files, how to view those files became not as clear in the digital world. In addition to that, we actually had another problem, which was as we moved to digital, there was more deliverables that were ultimately required. Now we've got the Netflix deliverable, and we've got the television deliverable, and we've got the Blu-ray, and we've got the theatrical deliverable as well as the iPhone. This didn't exist when we were just shooting film and sent film prints to the theater. People always ask though, what is ACES? And ACES actually is a series of standards, a series of core transforms, and a bunch of metadata and tools to manage all of those things, in addition to best practices for how one might move data from point A to point B.
Where do I download it?
Well, you don't download anything. So this is the most important thing. ACES is not something that you download from the Academy's website. It's not a double-clickable installer to install on your Mac. really what you're going to have to do is look to the product partners who actually are delivering your equipment to confirm that what they have done is implement the standards within their hardware and software. So ACES actually touches lots of parts of the production and post-production pipelines. It's there in visual effects, it's there on set, it's there in post-production, and ultimately it's there in the deliverable and the archive. But it offers a number of advantages. It's really about maintaining image quality and maintaining image quality for as long as possible through the production and post-production cycles. It allows for consistent color reproduction, and that really allows your creative vision to be communicated more clearly to the other people who are helping you make your movie. It was built from the ground up with high dynamic range and wide color gamut in mind. So it's enabling those technologies. And finally, it produces a deliverable in the end which is intended to be archival in the best way that we know how. What you're going to put into the archive has the maximum image quality and image fidelity possible, so that in the future you'll be able to revisit those materials and remaster them for new display technologies that we don't necessarily have today. There are other types of legacy systems out there. There's video, there's more traditional DI systems. Both of those are designed with specific requirements in mind, and they limit the image quality much more early on in the production and post-production cycles. Video, for example, produces broadcast-ready images directly out of the camera. Those broadcast displays have limited dynamic range and limited color gamut, so what's coming out of the camera is limited to those display technologies. In traditional DI, it's more of a downhill kind of flow, where you've got very high quality out of the camera. As we move into post-production and ultimately into the deliverables, that quality is whittled down. What ACES does is it maintains image quality, the highest image quality, until the very last moment, so that you have the choice very late in the process as to where you're going to ultimately display your images. The way, again, that you get ACES is by talking to the ACES product partners, and we have a long list of ACES product partners in a variety of product categories. It's names you may have heard of: the Aries, the Autodesks, the Canons, so on and so forth. Those product partners have worked with the Academy to ensure that they have a high quality implementation of ACES that works with the other product partners' implementations as well. So for the end user, you get a consistent experience. Once they've been qualified as having implemented ACES correctly, they will be allowed to use the ACES product partner logo. Filmmakers should look for those logoed products in order to ensure themselves that they've got a product which is qualified as working well within the ecosystem.
Let me, before we get into the screen gems and how you guys use it, just ask a couple of questions on specific types of uses so people can understand. So for example, how does ACES help on a set when you've got multiple cameras? And there's so many different kinds of cameras you can shoot with these days, and you got to bring them all in somehow and manage that. How does working through ACES help that?
Yeah, many times on motion pictures, they'll be shooting with a variety of cameras from different manufacturers, and by default, the data that comes out of those cameras is very different. Whether it's, you may have data coming out of an Arri, data coming out of a Canon, data coming out of a Red, and there's different encoding standards created by the manufacturers for those cameras. What ACES does is it allows you to take all those disparate camera files and re-encode them in a way that is consistent and similar, so that you can then cut all those images together and not have to deal with those gross differences between those cameras. It does it in a way that maintains the the specific look and feel of the camera that caused you to go to that camera originally. But it really does sort of take the hard work of just the nuts and bolts of getting these things together into a consistent space. It takes care of that for you.
So it's not changing the intrinsic look of the camera so much as it's just reconciling the cameras to be able to work together.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. There's two other cases that I think are worth noting, and some which we're going to talk about in your case too, but one is the experience of working in visual effects, where many different companies will touch a frame of a picture. How does ACES help there?
It helps by establishing standards and allowing for consistent viewing. The process today really requires a lot of very clear and specific communication if everything's going to work well. Because this is a standard, it allows people to just understand what it is they're supposed to do with an ACES file when it comes in. So they'll receive an ACES file from whether it's post in visual effects, and they can do their work, and they know how to view those ACES files, and likewise they know how to send those files back. It creates a situation where communication is much more smooth. It ultimately solves a lot of problems where they're sort of a keeper of the knowledge for how the pipeline has to be set up.
Well, in the terms of screen gems, Glenn, screen gems has been a really, I would say, an early adopter, and really one of the best early cases of a studio that's integrated from the beginning, from image capture all the way to mastering and archiving, which is actually the hopeful and highest and best use of ACES, I would say. So tell me how Screen Gems got involved with ACES and what you're doing now, all your films or some, or how that's working.
Yeah, I got involved with ACES when I first learned about the Sony f65 because it was a 4K, 8K camera. And that's when I made the commitment. I said, guys, we are able to capture with such great quality, with so much information, that you have to be able to respect the color science of what we're capturing and how that can translate and be communicated from the set to the offline, from the offline edit to marketing, all the way to the end. And that's when I got involved with ACES and started learning about ACES, what the Academy was doing.
So that's a great point. This tags on to what Alex earlier said, which is the communications. I mean, what happens when you have a movie and you've got a cinematographer looking at it, you've got a studio, you have distributors and other bosses, I'm sure, and how do you make sure, does this help you make sure that they're seeing what was intended, and whose intention is it that you're trying to protect?
Yeah, absolutely. And so many directors and so many cinematographers are concerned about people seeing their work sort of early on. And I think this is a great tool to put them at ease, so they realize that the color timer, in the old days, the color timer would sometimes make a few mistakes, make interpretations that weren't in line with the filmmaker's vision. This allows us to empower the filmmaker, whether that is the director or the cinematographer, so that they understand the lookup table cart that they use on set, and I'm going to describe what that is going to give them the power to rest at night and say, yes, the executive, the producer is seeing my work the way I intend my work to be seen. And to do that, one of the ways we approach it is with a lookup table cart. And that is that we get together, for instance, we've done it here at the DMPC, we'll set looks that are appropriate for the vision of that film beforehand. And you might have 15 looks, 20 looks, it depends. Once the cinematographer and the director like the looks, they can apply those looks on set. And then that's a consistent base all the way through.
And ACES helps carry that through to the offline and then the color.
That's exactly it, yeah.
I mean, that's Screen Gems is doing, popular mainstream movies.
Yes.
But not huge budget, I would say blockbuster movies in terms of budgets. So the lookup cart that you're using seems like a great way to accomplish looks without having a whole big hubbub on the set, but this
Yeah.
could be used. You could have it if you had a bigger film. You could have a DIT. You could have a cinematographer color correcting as you go.
Absolutely.
If you chose, right?
You can do it so many ways. I liked to take the approach that brought us back to filmmaking as we knew it before, where the footprint could be smaller, where you could be on the street, where you could be in a high-rise apartment. And that's why I suggested Lookup Table Cart, to say, guys, how can we best tell our stories? And sometimes our stories need to be told on a street corner. And that Lookup Table Cart is smaller. It's something that allows you to be in a space that doesn't require a tent. So you can say, look, I know this look is going to work.
Right.
You've tested it beforehand. And you can move faster. And that's also an important thing for me as a storyteller and someone trying to empower people to tell their stories.
So, I mean, I'll just mention some of the Sony cameras have this built into it. Have ACES, proxy, which is ACES support built in. And right now there's 5 companies: Aeroflex, Red, Panasonic, Sony, and Canon that have cameras or have pledged to have cameras that will support ACES. I'll just mention it works in animation too. So, for example, the Lego movie was done using ACES, and they didn't, I don't believe, have any live action in that movie. So,
A little bit.
Well, a little bit. But so it's sort of that the system goes, for any kind of production. It works in film, it works in digital, all kinds of things. What? Tell me, from a studio head perspective, why would a studio care about ACES? Why would they want to use ACES?
I think any studio wants to respect the vision of the director. And I think ACES allows that vision to be respected. We're hiring people to help tell our stories all around the world. So what better tool is out there than ACES? That's something that was created sort of camera agnostically to say, here is the science of color. Here is a way to interpret and understand and adhere to a color space that is considered important to the filmmakers. And to me, as a so-called studio boss, that's important to me. I want to empower the filmmakers to best tell their story, and that's why I love ACES.
That's great. So you're on the set, and you'll have recordings, and they'll get encoded and sent to post-production. Can you tell me a little bit about, you're working on an Avid, Shelly, tell me a little bit about the process, the handoff from set to you, and then what you do and how that goes.
Yes, as our editor.
As our editor, yes, forgive me.
It's been really transparent. We get the dailies processed from whoever, the dailies provider, laboratory, as MXF files and a bin, and so that hadn't changed at all. We would load the media, bring up the bin, and start editing right away. So the ACES component of that is very transparent to editorial. But what we do see is more consistent color across the board, and it's enabled us to kind of focus on editing and focus on storytelling. There's a big push with all these digital tools to say, well, you can color correct or you can fix that shot. It's like, as editors, we want to edit. We want to work on the cut. We don't want to work on the color or temp effects or any, we want to edit. Right. So ACES has kind of given us that platform to be able to have pretty solid cut. And our monitors, our tech support are always really great about coming and calibrating everything to Rec 709, although they're prosumer monitors, so we do still struggle a little bit with color differences between different Avid systems. But, we're much more assured that what we're seeing is what was intended. And especially on the wedding ringer, with the evolution of doing several pictures on ACES, we saw a more consistent color across the board. And where that really came into play was during the testing period. When you start doing test screenings for audiences, you are under the gun, you've got to get things out, you're screening for an audience of 300 people in a theater outside of the studio environment. We used to have to shut down, 2 days prior to then go color time your cut, and that's a lot of time to turn around and do notes. So now we go right up to the last minute, like the night before, we can still be editing and prepping to have the best cut available for the screening and not have to worry about color timing at all. Then we're basically just outputting a QuickTime, taking it to the theater, loading and doing a run through the next day, and we're ready to go. So that's been the most extraordinary part of the process.
We've come a long way since the grease pencil.
Yes, that's for sure. No more hunching over moviola,
Yep.
if anybody
Yeah.
knows what that is. So what I thought was interesting is you said it got better over a couple of pictures. Was that not necessarily that ACES got better, but that your process, your streamlining
the
and integration
process.
got easier, just as it more comfortable, or what did you mean by that?
I don't, a little bit of that, more comfortable knowing, what's happening to our dailies, knowing how they're processed, and also just the filmmakers, being more comfortable implementing it, across the board. On all these shoots now we've got 2 and 3 cameras,
Right.
usually the same, Sony cameras, but there are 3 cameras.
Right.
So we're dependent on the camera crew and the production crew to make sure those looks are applied consistently across all the cameras, on all the setups, on all the takes. And so we're seeing a lot more of that become streamlined in production, which carries through to the post-production process. So we're seeing better product in the editing room.
Well, that's good. So that must make the producer side of your brain happy.
Yes.
Because things
Yeah.
hopefully run smoother.
Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit about the deliverables or mastering or archiving using ACES? Does that help you make deliverables faster?
Yeah, I think it does. One, I'm thrilled that we're high dynamic range ready, because I've always said it's about protecting the film today, and it's about protecting the film for tomorrow. We have to future protect.
Right.
And knowing the color space allows us to be ready for HDR, which is very exciting. And knowing that color space means we can archive it in RAW, and yet always go back and apply the look later for whatever technology is coming down the pike.
Alex, can you talk a little bit about that sort of idea of the digital master? Is there something you can add there?
Yeah, ACES actually makes a lot of sense as an archival element. We talk about raw files, like non-debarred files, and that's ultimately what's being captured by the camera, but that doesn't really represent your movie because it doesn't have visual effects, it doesn't have your color timing, it's not edited. ACES, once everything's been brought into the ACES file format, it really represents sort of a cut color timed negative effectively. I mean, it's a little cliche to say digital negative, but it is kind of the closest thing to your finished movie with the highest fidelity that you ever had at your disposal. Putting that in the archive allows you to protect for the future. It allows you to go to high dynamic range displays in the future. It allows you to go to wider color gamut displays when those become available. It really does protect the asset in a way that is just not possible with any other digital technology today. And the Academy cares deeply about preserving the heritage of motion pictures, and we don't want to see movies effectively disappear and the Blu-ray to become the highest quality archival component that's left. So we really feel strongly that ACES is a very good basis for an archival master.
Cool. Let's talk about the wedding ringer. Tell me a little bit about how you used ACES there. If it was the way you just described, we'll roll a clip and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay, great. The Wedding Ringer, starring Kevin Hart, Josh Gad, shot mostly, if not all on location, in Los Angeles. And the color space was very important. We had a lot of different color palette in the film with our actors, with our scenery, with our locations. We were mixing tungsten and sodium vapor lighting and LED lights and so forth and so on. We were shooting in areas where you might be lit interior, but you're balancing a dynamic exterior evening of the cityscape. So really understanding the color palette beforehand was critical. And it's a comedy. Comedies are really dependent on the slick and Hollywood look of the film. You know, the brightness and the palette and the, make sure you're having fun and so forth and so on. So we applied all the looks beforehand, we understood the looks beforehand, and then we just went to those locations and shot. And we really, all the way through it, had a consistent understanding as to what we were capturing, what it was going to look like afterwards. The pipeline was great. And we also, by the way, we from time to time did have some point of view cameras. And even though a point of view camera may not have ACES attached to it, as an editor, I believe, that has a similar palette that you can apply because you understand A and B and C cameras.
Right. Well, maybe Alex, you're the best one to say. So tell me about getting cameras or data in to ACES for a camera that isn't one of the product partners? Is that possible?
Yeah, you definitely want to talk to the manufacturer of the camera about getting that data into ACES, because they are in the best position to be able to do that. Ultimately, the best cameras for for translating into ACES are cameras that are capable of supporting high dynamic range and wide color gamut and effectively shooting raw data, put that in quotes. But
as a reality, so many productions use little cameras, and there's someone has to write a bit of a program to get the data
absolutely.
in. Talk about that.
We support bringing cameras that produce data for standard displays, whether it's with broadcast monitor, video style cameras. We support bringing that data into ACES. You won't get the dynamic range back that's been lost in the process of generating something that's display referred right out of the camera. But at least you'll be able to bring that data in and cut it in with the rest of your higher quality images to be able to maintain consistent looks and really allow things to fit together pretty nicely.
And that's a great thing, and that's what we did. We would have 2 or 3 seconds of that point of view camera just to complement something. You know, maybe it's underneath a wheel in a car to get a little 2-second action piece. But you know, again, as Alex said, it's a wonderful way to complement how to tell a story and know that you've got enough consistency there. But certainly, it's not the actor camera. It's not static on the actor's face.
All right, great. Well, let's roll the clip, and then we'll talk about the specific scenes a little bit and how you took that through the process.
That sounds great.
Great.
What the hell were you saying?
She cornered me.
Doug, in the future, if somebody asks you something that boxes you in, you boomerang it.
Boomerang?
You respond with either a compliment or a question. Compliments are for women, questions are for men. So if I were to ask you something about Vic that you and I haven't discussed, what would you say, Doug?
You're very handsome.
Thank you, Doug. That's a compliment. Compliments are for women, questions are for men. You throw out random words.
You're confusing me a lot right now.
You use random words that would distract them from the original question.
Random words.
We have 18 hours to prepare for this brunch with the Palmers, which means we have 18 hours for a shotgun intro. Let's get to work. You want to start off with the HW2s.
Right.
How, where, what. These are the 3 basic questions that everyone I encounter as Vic are going to ask. How do we meet? Where am I from? What do I do? If we know nothing else, we can tread enough water to fake a stomach cramp and run away. How do we meet?
Freshman year, Stanford.
That means I'm smart. Where am I from?
I never said.
North Dakota.
Why North Dakota?
Do you know anybody in North Dakota?
No.
Nobody does. What do I do?
You're in the military.
Attaboy. See, now you're thinking. No address, no phone number. And chicks dig the uniforms. So we're like shooting fish in a barrel.
Actually, I don't think you're gonna be shooting any fish in this particular barrel.
An army guy that's the best man, not hitting on the bridesmaids, they'll think I'm a homosexual.
Well, actually...
Well, actually what? You told me I'm a homosexual, Doug?
No, not that per se.
What per se, Doug? Tell me.
Bick Mitchum is actually Father Bick Mitchum.
You told him I'm a priest, Doug?
Well, actually, it was Gretchen who
You
said
told
it.
Gretchen I'm a priest,
No,
Doug?
Gretchen said...
There was nothing else that popped in your head.
At the time, I thought it was a really smart idea.
A priest?
But now I can see that it's gonna
Priest?
upset you. Can't.
Oh, well, I gotta get them all out now because I'm a priest and I can't cuss around your family, Doug.
Oh, come on.
That's the last one. To whom did you lose your virginity?
Jill Abramowitz, freshman year.
Far side or the near side?
Farsighted.
Okay.
Wait, let me finish. And nearsighted.
Do you supinate or pronate?
What?
Does your foot roll inward or outward?
Outward.
Okay, that explains the weight gain. Pepsi or Coke? Sunset, full moon. If you could pick your favorite superhero, who would it be?
Is Pac-Man a superhero?
No, he's not. Stairs or elevators? Never mind. Forget it. Okay, Doug, I'm almost happy right now. What's my name?
That would be Bick Mitchum.
Where am I from?
You're from North Dakota. Ask me why you're from North Dakota.
Tell me why I'm from North Dakota,
Because
Doug.
who the f knows anybody from North Dakota?
I want to hear my name again. What's my name,
you
Doug?
are Bick Mitchum.
Rhythm.
Bick Mitchum. Bick Mitchum.
What are your phobias?
I fear raccoons.
Favorite sport, Doug?
Baseball. And I love women's basketball.
Come on, we're getting too tired. Yes. Doug! Get your ass up. We're gonna be late for brunch.
Great. So, I mean, that clip had so many different looks.
Yeah.
I mean, it had day, it had night, it had backlit, it had front lit. African American, all kinds of skin tones. Tell me a little bit about that experience shooting that. And
You know, LED lighting, because we were really in a confined space, balancing whatever light was outside by the city, and understanding the whole transitional palette that we had to get through, because the story had to take us from day into night, and that was the amazing part. So once we got to offline, you know, we were able to tell that story beautifully. We were able to test it without having to, you know, recolor time as much. And then once we got into the DI, you were there. You probably had a blast with that thing, because it's one of my favorite sequences photographically.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, our colorist had the information that he needed to have, because you see, like, Kevin's in the foreground, and then you've got daylight behind him and the whole cityscape behind him.
Yeah.
So we did the standard windows and the normal processes that you would do. We didn't have to do anything extraordinary. We didn't have to resort to visual effects at all. You know, each piece was timed with windows, and then there were cross dissolves between them all. So, you know, it took a little bit of time, but everything was there that needed to be there. So it was pretty seamless in the DI.
yeah, I remember we had a conversation with Trent, who is the DI colorist, and he said something to the effect of directors walk in and they'll go, "Yep, that's what I shot with ACES," as opposed to, "What's that?" I don't recognize that footage. So that went smoothly in that session.
Yeah, and in terms of the DI working with Trent, he had a period where he took the cut and he kind of did his own pass, and you know, everything kind of fell into place, and whatever needed to be tweaked, he tweaked. And I think maybe he only had a few days in there to himself before he was done.
For the whole movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the whole movie.
Yeah.
And we would sneak in and kind of take a peek before he was done. And then our DP, Brad Lipson, came in and had like a day and a half, 2 days tops, I think, if that.
Not a lot of time.
It's
for
not a
DP,
lot of
yeah.
time, but we didn't need it. We weren't rushing. We didn't run out of time. We're used to being in that DI session for days and days and days and
Right.
days. And it's kind of shrunk that process considerably, which has made our post-production supervisor like crazy happy.
Cinematographers really seem to like ACES. We get a lot of great feedback from cinematographers because with ACES proxy support on set, they're able to light with their light meters again, and they are able to see on set what it is will ultimately pop up in the DI. That's why there are no surprises. It just works for them. They created a look on set with their lights and with the look cart, and when they get to DI, it's not different. It's what they created.
Yeah, I think that's
Right.
important, because you know the cinematographer wants to be on set, and oftentimes when we get ready for them to come in
Right.
and see the DI process, they may be on location. So you know we have to find that window, and that window it becomes more and more of a narrowed window.
Right.
So you know the more productive they can be in the DI means they can be more productive as cinematographers on whatever movie or TV show they're shooting.
Right. So I mean, I think it's worth noting, and Alex, comment if you would, that ACES is not destructive to the underlying media, right? It's sort of
No, absolutely not. It's about maintaining maximum image quality. It's about maintaining the fidelity of all the original source material. You can apply these looks, and they're applied in a non-destructive way. If you decide that you don't like them, you can take them out. And the cinematographer may set a look on set, and then ultimately get into the DI and they see it and they decide that's not quite what I was going for, and they're able to change it. So they're not locked in early in the process to a very specific look because it was applied destructively to the data. It offers a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, if I could add to that,
Please.
it used to be when we were, as a community, as a filmmaking community, we're transitioning from film to so-called HD or digital to 2K, 4K, etc. There was a time when we were baking information in on the set, and that is destructive. But when you're able to capture raw, when you're able to apply ACES, you're free still to change your mind. Could you imagine a filmmaker wanting to change his mind?
never heard of that.
No.
But I think it gave Trent some comfort in the DI, you know, because he could pull everything up and he would say, oh, okay, I know what they're going for here, you know,
Yeah.
and he was able to have a greater sense of confidence and comfort knowing what the filmmaker intended, as opposed to maybe the old days where it kind of was up to him
Right.
and to, you know, to say this should be yellow, this should be blue,
Yeah.
and then the DP would come in and say, no, this should all be red. So he could know in advance, hey, this is what they're going for. Okay, I can figure out these scenes or
Right.
these scenes, and then he could make a more educated, you know, assumption, and say, well, to balance these two scenes, I need to tweak this like this, and then they'll
Yeah.
fall in line.
I mean, I remember even going back further than that, some DPs telling me they felt like their whole career was in the hands of some like 22-year-old kid at the lab at 3 in
Yeah.
the morning, and they would like furiously write notes. Should look like this or should like that. And there's so much opportunity for, you know, miscommunication. I think that
Right.
part of ACES that helps that communication visually is important. Is there anything you could talk about with visual effects in either of those movies
For
or that you've
visual
done?
effects, it changed our approach from editorial in that, you know, we still would make an EDL and send it to the lab to pull the shot, and within that EDL we would select a color decision list option in the EDL, so that information went to the lab, they pulled the shot, Trent or a color timer would take a look at it and make sure that it looked okay, and it would go right off to visual effects. In the old days, you know, we would pull plates. Because you're doing visual effects across the span of months of post-production, your DP is almost never available to come color grade plates. And of course you haven't color graded the scene either. So editorial would run over to the lab and with the colorist make a guess about color timing plates and send it off to visual effects. Now that process has been shrunk, streamlined. We have confidence that we're sending visual effects the right material, and like you said, with multiple visual effects houses, it's even more crucial that people are
Right.
getting the right material. So there's very little change or tweaking that has to happen with regard to color. When we get the final shot back, we're pretty close.
And viewing that color in a consistent manner across these various visual effects facilities, one of the biggest problems that we've heard about with more legacy workflows is that the various visual effects facilities will get the files, and then all of a sudden the questions start happening. Well, what color space is it in? How do I view it? What LUTs do I apply? And sometimes double LUTs are applied. All sorts of things happen. With ACES, it's very clear as to how you're supposed to view the files. It's very clear what files you're receiving. It's very clear what files go back. So the consistency and the standard process allows for a much more seamless visual effects experience once everything comes back.
And that was important too. We used to get shots back and they wouldn't match the rest of the cut. I could, you know, then I've got to spend time trying to color correct a visual effect.
That's hard because it's already
Yeah.
they've baked in
Right.
you can't change the background too much without changing the foreground then. Yeah, interesting. Well, let me just go back to the cinematographer thing a little bit. So, because you have movies coming up, and you're always talking to cinematographers, and you broach the subject of ACES, and you know, how do people react to that?
Always with a sigh of relief.
Oh.
Cinematographers want to, in my experience, every cinematographer wants to try to employ ACES. Sometimes the most heated debate is exactly personal taste as to how to achieve ACES. You can do it with a DIT, you can do it with a tent, you can do it with a lookup table cart, you can do it on board the camera, and they're all right. And I tell them, I said, you know, I have a right way, you have a right way, they have a right way. Let's try to find a way that everybody is comfortable with for this particular film.
So a lot of the films that have been done with ACES, and there's been 40 or 50 large features done with the pre-release version of ACES, not the 1.0, were heavy effects movies, because that was a very clear place that, you know, Oblivion, Elysian, that Chappie, where ACES had a clear benefit. You guys are doing mainstream films, but what would you say even to a slightly more indie filmmaker? Is there value there for at least looking into ACES for their project?
Absolutely. There's always value there when it makes your film better. If it, you know, it shouldn't cost you any more, because again, there are many ways to achieve ACES. And so you have to ask your question, why wouldn't you want to do it the best way? And the best way, in my opinion, is because we're telling a story in a visual medium.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you not want your visual medium to be interpreted correctly according to the people you hired to make your movie?
Right.
And I haven't found a reason not to be ACES because of that.
Oh, well said, very good. So we do have some questions for our panel, and the first one's for Shelly. So the question is, you're an editor on a show, and someone tells you or whispers to you, or you hear a rumor that it might be an ACES show. What do you do? Who do you talk to? How do you figure out what would you recommend people do to get ready for that?
I would say, my first reaction was like, oh, what now? Something else to think about. But then when I kind of got into it and discovered, what it does for you, what I would tell editors is just know the basics of ACES. Know just a high-level overview. You don't need to know, input transforms and all the technicalities. You need to know kind of globally how are my dailies being processed, and understand, okay, so this means I'm going to see what I was intended to see. And that really is transparent to the editorial process. So there's nothing to be afraid of. It's very streamlined and very simple. Nothing changes your routine in that respect. And I would really say what makes me most excited about it is I can focus on editing, and I don't have to be so waylaid by trying to balance color myself with the Avid tools, which are very robust. But now I've got a basic cut to work with. That's what everybody was seeing on set. It's what the director and DP and producer intended to see. I can focus on editing, and then I can get through the rest of the post-production process much more seamlessly than before.
You could say the same thing about cinematographers too, though. It lets them do their job better, I guess, on some level, manages that. So
Yeah.
All right, I think we've got another question, and that is for Alex from the Academy. What is it about the Academy and the process? Why did the Academy do this again, and how are they involved in relation to the other people who helped start the process?
Yeah, the Academy is a unique organization. We've been around about 80 years, and it's made up of approximately 6,000 members that represent people who work in the motion picture industry and are making films. The cinematographers, the producers, the directors, the actors, pretty much everybody who touches the motion picture process in the Academy. We're a nonprofit, and our mission really is to protect and preserve motion pictures. We try to do that through communication, education. Since the very beginning, the Academy has been deeply involved in helping to influence standards around motion picture production and post-production. Right from 1927, when we started, sciences were very important to the Academy. This is a continuation of that legacy. Again, we saw our standards disappear as we transitioned from film to digital, and we saw movies disappearing that were captured digitally, but did not have standards to adhere to, and ultimately, when they got to the archive, were sadly lost. The Academy doesn't want to see that happen. We want to see these movies preserved, and with that understanding, we were able to bring together filmmakers, manufacturers, and pretty much everybody involved in the creation of motion pictures to set aside their own agendas and work for ultimately what was best for the creation and preservation of motion pictures.
Great. Well, that actually brings up a question that I have for you. It tags on to that, which is, so the Academy is in a sort of a unique place to do that globally, but as a producer and a studio boss, you have to do that on your production. You got to get buy-in from all these different people, because last time I checked, nobody rules by fiat anymore. So how do you get buy-in from all these different people and get the best out of them? How does that work?
I have been blessed that when I pitched to the film director and the cinematographer that I'm excited about ACES and that Screen Gems has been an ACES studio, they're quick to understand that I am trying to preserve a common goal, something that, much like what Alex said at the Academy, works for me. And that is that everybody plays in the same sandbox. the color is in the same sandbox, so that the editor, the director, the cinematographer, all parties involved with the story-making process will understand the vision we have on that set. And that's what's exciting for me as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And I just want to thank Screen Gems and thank Sony for helping put this on. If you want more information about ACES, you can go to oscars.org/ACES. You'll find links to films that were produced with ACES and television shows. You'll find other kinds of resources. There'll be video resources up shortly, and ways to communicate with us and ways to get involved. You can follow us on Twitter. We have email lists and things that keep people up. Lots of events, lots of education and training events. Those are very ongoing for us as we spread the word. So thank you very much, and we hope this has been helpful and that you will be prepared next time someone says ACES to know what it is and be willing to use it. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us.